David Livingstone's journey to Africa didn't start when he boarded a ship. It started in the years before, with hard work, self-education, and a deep sense of calling. In this video, we'll look at the pivotal years of his life, from ages 19 to 27. We'll learn what events in his life prepared him for this groundbreaking work in Africa. From the age of 10 to 19, David Livingstone was a piecer in the cotton mills. He was then put at spinning, which was, he says, extremely severe on a slim, loose-jointed boy such as I was then. He was glad of the promotion, however, not only because of the higher wages, but on account of the opportunities it gave him for reading. Not that he had any more leisure than before. His working hours were still from 6 in the morning till 8 at night. But he found a way of fixing his book upon the spinning frame, where it would be constantly before his eyes as he passed and repassed at his work. In those days, Missionary was not self-acting as it is now. David needed to give constant attention to his work, so that he never had so much as a whole minute at one time for his book. But by dwelling upon the few sentences which met his eye as he passed before his book, revolving them over and over in his mind until the next spare moment came, he really learned far more than if he could have gone more rapidly through his books. Thus, too, he gained a surprising power of abstracting his mind from outward objects, and even from the sense of personal discomfort. It was this power which made it possible for him in later years to carry on his writing and his scientific observation in the midst of the distracting noises of his native companions, and often when undergoing the most tormenting anxiety or the severest suffering. Far from regretting these early years of toil in the cotton mill or counting them as lost time, he felt that they were his best preparation for the work of his life. Although they kept him from entering on the work until he was nearly 30 years old, he often said that if he had to begin life again, he would have to begin it in the same lowly style and to pass through the same hardy training. Indeed, David Livingstone loved to trace the hand of Providence through his whole life, and to see how constantly it had been shaping events to fit him for a service of which he himself never dreamed. One of these providential guidings, which people often call coincidences, was the very promotion to cotton spinning, which, by giving him a better opportunity for reading, led by means of Dr. Dick's works to the opening of his eyes to the love of Jesus Christ, and to the fullness and freedom of the salvation which he offered. In the joyful gratitude which filled his soul as he realized his divine love, he longed to bring everyone else to the same glorious knowledge. It seemed to him that the salvation of men ought to be the chief desire and aim of every Christian, and with a full heart he resolved that he would give to the cause of missions all that he might earn beyond what was required for his subsistence. It did not occur to him at this time to give himself, but 2 years later there came, as he always believed, another providential leading which brought him to that decision. In the meantime, the books which had guided him to Christ had not led him away from his favorite studies. The works of Dr. Dick, being a reverential study of nature by the light of religion, had only whetted his appetite for scientific research, and the reading of these 2 years, carried on under the difficult conditions which we know of, was all the time molding his intellect into greater fitness for his as yet undreamed-of career. The providential call to that career came when he was 21 years old, in the shape of an appeal to the churches of Britain and America on behalf of China, by Mr. Gutzliff, a missionary physician. The appeal made a profound impression on young Livingstone. The claims of so many millions of his fellow creatures, and the complaints of the scarcity of qualified missionaries, stirred him to give himself up to such work. From that time, his efforts were constantly directed toward that subject without any fluctuation. His first idea was to go to China, and to go, as Gutzliff had said, as a missionary physician. His fondness for science made such a profession more attractive to him than that of a religious teacher merely, but his choice made the work of preparation far more formidable to a young man. A theological education could have been obtained at a very trifling expense, but a medical course was a costly affair. The question of expense, however, did not alarm him in the least. Telling no one of his plan but his parents and his minister, and receiving from them a hearty Godspeed, he set about making the earnings of 6 months pay not only the support of the year, but the cost of fees, books, and lodgings, away from home for the other 6 months. No one could have done it but the boy who had learned by long experience of self-denial and cheerful endurance to meet all the discomforts of cold rooms, hard fare, and scanty clothing, not only with fortitude, but without any injury to his health. He was 23 years old when he began this arduous life. It was the winter of 1836-37. Furnished by a friend with a list of lodgings, Livingstone and his father set out from Blantyre one wintry day while the snow was on the ground and walked to Glasgow. The lodgings were all too expensive. All day they searched for a cheap apartment, and at last in Rotten Row they found a room at 2 shillings a week. Next evening David wrote to his friends that he had entered in the various classes and spent £12 in fees, that he felt very lonely after his father left, but would put a stout heart. Livingstone's spirits, always bright and buoyant, seemed to rise with the self-restraint of this hard winter's experience. He was more than ever the life of the household when, after his Saturday evening's long walk home, 7 miles of dreary trudging through snow and storm, he would spend hours in relating to the family all that had befallen him since the Monday morning. The home circle looked forward to these Saturday evenings as the brightest hours in the whole week. Livingstone's time while in Glasgow was devoted to the study of Greek, theology, and more especially of medicine. He made a few warm and influential friends, though at the time he gave no promise of any unusual capacity, and he was in far too humble a sphere to attract much attention. His chief friend was a Mr. Young, who was then assistant to one of the medical professors, and who afterwards became known as the man who discovered the means of refining petroleum and adapting it to illuminating purposes, and of manufacturing paraffin and paraffin oil. With Sir Paraffin, as Livingstone used to call his friend, he spent many pleasant hours busy with the turning lathe and other tools which were to be found in his room, and thus gaining knowledge and a dexterity which were of the very highest value to him, when, as he said, he had to become a jack of all trades in Africa. At the close of the first winter's study he returned to his mill work in Blantyre. When the second winter came, he found that his savings were not quite sufficient for his support, and for the first and only time in his arduous course was obliged to borrow. His brother John, barely richer than himself, became his creditor, with a generous confidence in his younger brother's ability, which proves the hard-working laborer to have been himself a man of no ordinary character. It was in the course of his second session in Glasgow that Livingstone decided to offer himself to the London Missionary Society. He preferred this society because it simply sent the gospel to the heathen without reference to denomination. It was not, however, without a pang that he offered his services to any society, for it was not quite agreeable to one accustomed to work his own way to become in a measure dependent upon others. His offer was provisionally accepted, and Livingstone was summoned to London to meet the directors. On the night of his arrival he met a young Englishman who had come up for the same purpose, Joseph Moore, afterward missionary to Tahiti. Between these two sprang up a friendship so warm that their families used to speak of them as Jonathan and David. Mr. Moore, in writing of this time, says, "On Monday we passed our first examination. On Tuesday we went to Westminster Abbey." Who that had seen these two young men passing from monument to monument could have divined that one of them would one day be buried with the nations? Rather, with the civilized world's lament in that sacred shrine. The wildest fancy could not have pictured that such an honor awaited David Livingstone. I grew daily more attached to him. I should be rather at a loss to reply. There was truly an indescribable charm about him, which with his rather ungainly ways, and by no means winning face, attracted almost everyone, and which helped him so much in his after wanderings in Africa. He won those who came near him by a kind of spell. After passing 2 examinations, we were both so far accepted by the society that we were sent to the Reverend Richard Cecil, who resided in Essex. Most missionary pupils were sent to him for a 3 months' probation, and if a favorable opinion was sent to the board of directors, they went to one of the independent colleges. The students did not for the most part live with Mr. Cecil, but took lodgings in the town, and went to his house for meals and instruction in classics and theology. Livingstone and I lived together. We read Latin and Greek, and began Hebrew together. Each day we took walks and visited all the spots of interest in the neighborhood, among them the county churchyard, which was the burial place of John Locke. Livingstone was at this time 25 years of age, a tall, awkward young man with a face only redeemed from utter plainness by his mother's beautiful blue eyes, but with that wonderful charm of which his friend speaks, which was the direct influence of a noble soul and an exalted Christian character. Among their duties, Mr. Cecil's pupils were expected to lead by turns a family prayer, and also to prepare sermons, which, having been corrected by their tutor, were learned by heart and delivered to congregations in the neighboring villages. One evening, Livingstone was sent for to supply the place of a minister who had fallen ill since morning. He took his text, writes his friend, read it out very deliberately, and then his sermon had fled. Midnight darkness came upon him, and he abruptly said, "Friends, I have forgotten all I have to say." and hurrying out of the pulpit, he left the chapel. The 3 months' probation being over, Mr. Cecil, judging from his hesitating manner of conducting family prayer and from his lamentable failure in preaching, sent an unfavorable report to the mission board. Happily, one of the directors pleaded hard for another probation, and after another trial he was finally accepted and sent to London for further study. Here he spent 2 years, chiefly in the study of medicine and in hospital practice. Not only was scientific study more congenial to him than abstract theology, but it was his best hope for gaining an entrance into China, his chosen field. Although he made many friends among his teachers, yet no one dreamed of his future success. His mind and character were both slow to mature, and the directors did not count him among their ablest men. They thought him unfit for cultured India, and China being then closed by the Opium War, it was proposed to send him to the West Indies. This Livingstone strongly opposed, since the years he had spent in medical study would be lost in a country where there was already regular practitioners. Finally, one of those providential leadings occurred, which he was so fond of tracing. The Reverend Dr. Moffat, whose name, as well as that of his whole family, will ever be identified with Africa, came to England, and created a great interest in his work. I had occasion, Dr. Moffat writes, to call for someone at Mrs. Sewell's, a boarding house for young missionaries where Livingstone lived. I soon observed that this young man was interested in my story, that he would sometimes come quietly and ask me a question or two, and that he was always desirous to know where I was to speak in public, and attended on those occasions. By and by he asked me whether I thought he would do for Africa. I said I believed he would, if he would not go to an old station, but would advance to unoccupied ground, specifically the vast plain to the north, where I had sometimes seen, in the morning sun, the smoke of 1,000 villages where no missionary had ever been. At last Livingstone said, "What is the use of my waiting for the close of this miserable war? I will go at once to Africa." The directors concurred, and Africa became his sphere. The decision and friendship with Dr. Moffat, who ever after exerted a strong influence over him, appear to have been the needed touches to develop his latent powers. His whole character seemed to expand and his mind to blossom out into strength during the last few months in England. His preparations were by this time nearly complete. A serious illness for a time interrupted his plans, but gave him an opportunity to spend a few weeks in his beloved home. There was then nothing more to do but to pass his examinations, take his medical degree, and bid his family a last farewell. One precious evening he had to pass with them. He would have sat up all night to talk, but his mother would not hear of it. I remember my father and him, writes his sister, talking over the prospects of Christian missions. They agreed that the time would come when rich and great men would think it an honor to support whole stations of missionaries, instead of spending their money on hounds and horses. On the morning of 17th of November, we got up at 5 o'clock. My mother made coffee, David read the 121st and the 135th Psalm, and prayed. My father and he walked to Glasgow to catch the Liverpool steamer. There the father and son parted for the last time on earth. 3 days later, being then 27 years and 6 months old, Livingstone was ordained a missionary. It was the closing act of his old life, the beginning of his new. And from that day, he belonged to Africa. In our next video, we will be looking at Livingstone's first years on the mission field of Africa, how he got established, what he did in those opening years. So we hope you will join us next week for that video, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone that you think will enjoy learning about the life of missionary David Livingstone.